The sun over Karasavan was not warm. It was harsh, like a blade cutting through the skin. Heat shimmered over the dusty market streets. The air smelled of sweat, oil, and something burnt. The sound of voices filled the air, traders shouting, buyers bargaining, children laughing in the distance. But one sound cut through it all. A scream. It was sharp, desperate, and not human. People turned their heads for a moment, then went back to their business. No one cared. No one wanted trouble. In the center of the market, a small cage stood on a raised platform. Inside it, an alien girl sat on her knees. She was thin, almost fragile, with grayish skin and long white hair that hung like dirty silk. Her wrists were bound with metal cuffs. One side of her face was bruised, and a trickle of dried blood marked her lip. Two large alien guards stood beside the cage. They were covered in thick armor plates, their scaled skin visible between the gaps. One held a stick with sharp metal teeth at the end, an electric prod. The other held a chain connected to the girl's collar. The first guard jabbed the prod. Through the bars, the girl flinched and gasped, her small hands gripping the metal floor. The crowd laughed. "She doesn't even cry anymore," one voice said. "She will," another replied. "They all do." They called her worthless. They called her trash. Some said she had been caught stealing. Others whispered she was a runaway slave from the mines. No one asked for the truth. No one wanted it. At the edge of the crowd, a human stood still. Daniel was tall for his kind, broad-shouldered, with dark eyes that scanned the scene without blinking. He wore a worn jacket and heavy boots, dust clinging to them from long travel. His hand rested on the strap of the bag slung across his chest, but his body was still. Only his jaw moved, clenching, unclenching. Humans were rare here, most avoided. Kura 7, a place where law belonged to whoever had the most weapons. But Daniel wasn't here to trade or fight. He had been passing through on his way to the docks, looking for supplies before leaving the planet. And then he heard the scream. Now, his eyes stayed locked on the girl. She had looked up once, just for a second. Their eyes had met. Hers were large, a pale silver color, and full of something Daniel had seen before. Not just fear, but the empty look of someone who no longer expected rescue. One of the guards noticed Daniel staring. "Move along, human," he barked. "Unless you want to buy her?" The crowd laughed again. Some shouted the starting price, high enough to make most people walk away. But Daniel didn't move. His voice, when it came, was quiet but sharp. "Why is she here?" The guard grinned, showing sharp yellow teeth. "She ran. Her owner wants her punished. We're teaching her what happens to runaways. Then she goes to a warlord. He'll decide if she works in the mines or somewhere worse." The second guard smirked. "You want her? Pay. Otherwise, keep walking." Daniel's eyes flicked to the girl again. She coughed, her small body shaking. Dust clung to her hair. Her knees had scraped raw spots where she had fallen against the cage floor. The human's heartbeat was steady. But something inside him burned. He had seen cruelty before, too many times. But this was different. This was open, public, and no one lifted a hand to stop it. "I'll take her," he said. The crowd went silent for a moment. Even the girl's head turned toward him, slow and unsure. The first guard tilted his head. "You're joking." "I'm not," Daniel replied. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The guard stepped closer, blocking the cage. "You can't just take her. You pay or you leave." "I'm not paying," Daniel said. The crowd began to murmur. A human standing up to the market guards was something they didn't see every day. The first guard's grin faded. His hand tightened. "Around the prod, then you leave." or you stay here in chains." Daniel's hand moved away from his bag. His shoulders shifted slightly, almost relaxed. But his eyes never left the guards. "No," he said. "She leaves with me." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The heat pressed down, the dust swirled in the air, and the girl's breathing was the only sound Daniel could hear. Then the guard laughed, short and sharp. "You must not value your life, human." Daniel didn't answer. He took one slow step forward into the shadow of the cage. His boots stirred the dust. The crowd pressed back, sensing something was about to happen. The girl looked at him again. This time, there was no emptiness in her eyes, only confusion, and the smallest flicker of hope. The guard raised the prod. Daniel's hand curled into a fist. The market went silent, and then the first strike came. The guard's strike came fast, the electric prod hissing through the air toward Daniel's chest. Daniel moved a half step to the side. The sharp end of the prod missed him by inches, stabbing into the metal bars of the cage instead. A bright spark danced along the bars, and the alien girl flinched. Pressing herself back into the corner, Daniel's hand shot forward. He grabbed the prod's shaft and twisted hard. The guard's grip broke, and the weapon clattered to the ground. The crowd gasped. No one disarmed a market guard in public, not unless they wanted their bones broken. The second guard reacted instantly. He swung the chain connected to the girl's collar like a whip. The heavy end aimed straight for Daniel's head. Daniel ducked low, feeling the rush of air above him. His boots slammed forward, kicking the guard in the knee. A cracking sound followed, and the alien stumbled with a growl of pain. The first guard lunged again, its claws swiping toward Daniel's face. Daniel caught the alien's wrist, twisted, and shoved him backward. The guard hit the platform railing, sending a ripple of movement through the onlookers. Whispers rushed through the crowd. "A human fighting here. He's mad. He's going to die." Daniel ignored them. His focus stayed on the two guards, but his voice was calm, steady, the kind that cut deeper than a shout. "You had your chance to let her go," he said. The first guard spat on the ground. "She's property. She doesn't belong to you. You think you can walk in here and take her because you're human? You're nothing here." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Maybe, but she's not going back in that cage." The second guard, still clutching his knee, snarled. "Then you'll join her." They came at him together this time. One swung high, aiming to smash Daniel's skull. The other came low, claws ready to tear into his legs. Daniel stepped into the attack, not away from it. His left hand caught the high swing. His right drove into the second guard's face with a sharp, precise punch. The alien staggered back, blood dripping from his lip. The first guard tried to break free, but Daniel's grip was like steel. He yanked the alien forward and smashed his forehead into the guard's armored chest. It's hard enough to knock the wind out of him. The market roared now. Some shouted for the guards to kill him. Others yelled for Daniel to run. But no one moved to help either side. The alien girl's eyes were wide. She was pressed against the cage door, fingers curled around the bars. Breathing fast, Daniel kicked the fallen prod across the platform, away from the guards. He looked straight at her. "Stay down," he said. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. The first guard recovered enough to reach for the blaster at his side. The moment Daniel saw the movement, he acted. His foot came down hard on the guard's hand, pinning it to the floor. With his free hand, he grabbed the guard's shoulder and shoved him backward off the platform. The alien landed hard on the dusty ground, groaning. The second guard, half limping, half enraged, tried one last, desperate attack. He lunged forward, and Daniel met him with a single, brutal punch to the side of the head. The guard collapsed, rolling onto his back. Silence fell over the market. The only sound was the hot wind moving between the stalls. Daniel turned to the cage, his fingers wrapped around the heavy lock. It was thick, made of forged steel. His eyes narrowed and his grip tightened. With a sharp jerk, he twisted. The lock groaned, bent, and snapped. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Daniel swung the cage door open. The girl didn't move at first, staring at him like she couldn't believe what she'd just seen. "Come on," he said. His voice was softer. "Now, but firm. We're leaving." She hesitated, glancing at the crowd, at the two groaning guards, then back at him. Slowly, unsteadily, she crawled forward and stepped out. Her legs shook as they touched the dusty wood of the platform. Daniel moved to her side, steadying her without asking. She was lighter than he expected, her frame fragile, her skin warm. "With fever? Hold on," he told her. He bent, lifting her into his arms. She gasped quietly, unused to the sudden motion, but she didn't struggle. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Whispers turned into shouts. Someone yelled, "Stop him!" But no one stepped in front of him. The market guards were feared, but so were humans when they decided to fight. Daniel stepped down from the platform, boots crunching on the dry dirt. The girl's arms, hesitant at first, slowly tightened around his neck. They passed the edge of the crowd. Some faces turned away. Others stared openly. But no one tried to stop them. Behind them, a first guard groaned and shouted something in his native tongue. A call for backup. Daniel didn't look back. He adjusted his hold on the girl and moved quickly through the narrow side streets of Kura Seven's market, away from the platform, away from the open square. Away from the place where no one had cared until a human stepped in. The girl finally whispered, her voice dry and cracked. Why Daniel didn't slow down. His answer was simple, because no one else would. Daniel moved quickly, weaving through the narrow, dusty alleys behind the market. His boots hit the ground in steady, heavy steps, the girl's weight in his arms barely slowing him down. Her thin fingers gripped the fabric of his jacket, and her silver eyes darted around as if she expected danger to appear from every shadow. It wasn't a bad instinct, because danger was coming. Behind them, shouts rose. The market guards were not going to let this humiliation go unanswered. They had been beaten in front of a crowd, and worse, by a human. On Kura 7, that kind of insult could only be washed away with blood. Daniel turned a corner sharply, heading toward the less crowded section of the market where abandoned stalls stood like broken teeth. But as soon as he stepped into the open space, he saw them. 3 more guards. They were waiting, blocking the path ahead. One had a shock whip coiled in his hand. The other 2 held short spears tipped with energy points that hummed faintly in. The heat? Put her down, human. The one with the whip called out. His voice was calm, too calm, like a predator that already knew the kill was his. And maybe we'll let you live long enough to regret this. Daniel didn't stop walking. The girl tensed in his arms, whispering something in her native tongue, her voice shaking. Daniel didn't understand the words, but he understood the fear in her tone. He set her gently down behind him. Stay low. Don't move unless I tell you. Her lips trembled, but she nodded. The guard with the whip smirked. You think you can fight all of us, human? We've dealt with your kind before. Daniel's voice was quiet, almost too soft to hear. Not like me. The first move came from the left. A spear tip shot forward, aimed for Daniel's stomach. He stepped sideways, catching the shaft just behind the tip, and yanked it hard. The alien stumbled forward, and Daniel's elbow came down on the back of his neck, sending him to the ground. The second guard lunged from the right. Daniel spun, the stolen spear still in his hand, and used the blunt end to slam into the guard's jaw. A sharp crack sounded as the alien fell back with a grunt of pain. The third guard with the whip finally struck. The weapon snapped forward, wrapping around Daniel's forearm. The electric charge burned through the fabric of his jacket, biting into his skin. Daniel's teeth clenched, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he yanked his arm back sharply, pulling the guard off balance. In one smooth motion, Daniel closed the distance, grabbed the guard's collar, and drove his forehead into the alien's face. Blood sprayed, and the whip fell limp to the ground. For a moment, the only sound was the girl's fast breathing. Then more voices echoed from behind them. The original two guards from the platform had arrived. Limping but furious, joined by several others. Daniel grabbed the girl's hand. Run. They sprinted through the narrow gap between two old buildings. Daniel's long strides carried them quickly, but the girl's bare feet slapped painfully against the uneven ground. Still, she didn't complain, didn't let go. A blaster bolt sizzled past Daniel's head, hitting the wall beside them in a burst of heat. The guards were firing now. Daniel spotted a pile of old market crates ahead and pulled the girl toward them. They ducked behind the stack just as another bolt tore through the air where they had been seconds before. "Stay here," Daniel said again, his tone low but firm. The girl shook her head. "No, they'll kill you." He didn't have time to argue. The guards were closing in. Daniel grabbed a loose metal pipe from the ground. When the first guard rounded the corner, Daniel swung the pipe in a brutal arc, catching him across the side of the head. The alien collapsed instantly. The next two came together. Daniel slammed the pipe into the ground in front of them, scattering dust into their eyes, then kicked one in the chest, hard enough to send him crashing backward into the wall. The other swung wildly, but Daniel caught his arm and twisted until the alien screamed and dropped his weapon. A blaster bolt flew so close to Daniel's ear that the heat made his skin prickle. He turned and saw the limping guard from earlier. Aiming again. Without hesitation, Daniel threw the pipe like a spear. It spun through the air and struck the guard in the face, dropping him. The girl crawled out from behind the crates, eyes wide. "More. Coming," she whispered, pointing toward the street. Daniel glanced over his shoulder. She was right. More shadows moved between the stalls, the distinct shapes of armed guards. He picked her up again without a word and began running toward the far end of the alley, where the buildings thinned out. His mind was already scanning possible exits, and he knew they had to vanish completely or the guards would hunt them all day. The sounds of pursuit didn't fade. If anything, they grew louder. But Daniel's stride didn't slow. He was used. 2, running under fire. Finally, he spotted what he needed. A narrow doorway half hidden behind a broken sign. It was dark inside, a place the guards might not search right away. He slipped inside and pressed his back against the wall, holding the girl close and listening to the sound of boots pounding past outside. For now, they were safe. But Daniel knew. Safe on Kara-7 never lasted long. The dark room smelled of dust and rusted metal. Faint light leaked through cracks in the wooden boards that covered the broken windows. Somewhere above, a loose sheet of metal creaked in the wind. Daniel didn't move for several seconds. He pressed his back against the wall, one arm holding the alien girl close, his ears straining to catch every sound outside. The footsteps in the street slowed. Voices shouted in the alien tongue, sharp and frustrated. He could hear the clanging of weapons, the scrape of boots, the sound of someone giving orders. Then the steps grew faint. Moving away, only then did Daniel allow himself to breathe fully. The girl's thin body was tense in his arms. Her small hands clutched the front of his jacket like she was afraid he might vanish if she let go. He crouched, sitting her gently on her feet. She wobbled, and he steadied her with one hand on her shoulder. "You hurt?" he asked. She shook her head slowly, though her lips were pale and her eyes kept darting to the door. "No, just tired." Her voice was quiet, almost broken. Daniel studied her for a moment. She was young, maybe 15 by human measure, but there was something in her eyes that didn't belong to a child. Something that came from seeing too much pain. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small metal flask. "Drink." She hesitated before taking it, as if expecting him to snatch it back. But when he didn't, she lifted it to her lips and drank. Greedily, coughing a little at the end. "Slow," Daniel said, taking it back before she choked. "There's more later." The girl wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Why? You help me?" she asked. Daniel leaned back against the wall. He could have given her a dozen reasons, all true, all meaningless. In the end, he said, the one that mattered, because no one else would. She stared at him for a long moment, like she was trying to understand the shape of those words. Then she sat down on the dusty floor, pulling her knees to her chest. Daniel scanned the room. It looked like an old storeroom that had been abandoned for years. Broken crates lay scattered in the corners. A rusted ladder led up to a hole in the ceiling, probably the remains of a trapdoor. He moved quietly to the nearest wall and peeked through a crack. The street outside was empty now, but he knew better than to think the hunt was over. The guards would regroup. They would search every corner of this district, and if they found him with her, he turned back. The girl was still curled up on the floor, her thin frame shivering despite the heat outside. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then said, "Sira." Daniel nodded. "All right, Sira. We can't stay here long. They'll come back." Her eyes widened. "If they find me, they kill me." "They won't," Daniel said firmly. "But we have to move smart." He crouched in front of her so they were at eye level. "Can you walk?" She nodded quickly, though the movement seemed more about determination than strength. "Good. Will. Wait until the street's quiet, then head for the docks. My ship's there. Once we're off this planet, they can't touch you." Sira stared at him, as if she couldn't believe he had said it so simply, like freedom was just a place you could walk to. For a few minutes, they stayed in silence. The sound of the wind outside filled the room. Then, faintly, they both heard it, the crunch of boots on dirt. Daniel's hand went to the knife on his belt. He moved to the window. Crack again. 2 guards. Not the ones from before. These were younger, lighter armor, but their weapons were drawn. They were sweeping the street, checking doorways. Daniel ducked back and motioned for Sarah to stay quiet. He pointed upward, toward the ladder. She looked at it nervously, then at him. "Go," he whispered. She climbed slowly, her small hands gripping the rusty rungs. Daniel followed close behind, wincing as one of the steps groaned under his weight. They reached the trapdoor. Daniel pushed it up gently, just enough to peek through. Above was a flat rooftop, half covered in old solar panels. The view stretched over the narrow street and into the maze of market stalls beyond. He helped Sira through first, then pulled himself up and closed the trapdoor quietly. From up here, the air was hotter, the light sharper, but it was also easier to move without being seen. The guards below passed right under them, unaware. Daniel crouched low, guiding Sira toward the far edge of the roof. From here, they could cross to the next building, a narrow jump, but possible. Sira looked down at the gap and froze. I can't." Daniel met her eyes. "You can. I'll catch you." She swallowed hard, then nodded. She stepped back, ran, and jumped. Her feet landed awkwardly, and she almost slipped. But Daniel's hand caught hers and pulled her up. They moved again, rooftop to rooftop. until the market was just a blur behind them. Finally, Daniel found a spot between two larger buildings, where the shadows were deep and the noise from the main streets covered their movements. He crouched, scanning the distance toward the docks. They were close now. But close on Karasavan was still dangerous. Daniel looked at Sarah. "We keep moving, no matter what." She nodded, her eyes still wide, but a spark of something new inside. Them trust and trust. Daniel knew was a dangerous thing to give away here, but he wasn't going to let her down. Not now, not ever. The docks of Karasavan were still a few streets away, but Daniel knew better than to rush in blindly. The area around the spaceport was always busy, traders shouting, machines rumbling, fuel lines hissing, but it was also crawling with guards and bounty hunters. If the market guards had sent word ahead, the docks would already be on alert. That meant they had to wait. Daniel found a narrow gap between two massive cargo containers, stacked and forgotten in a quiet service lane. It was dark there, with just enough space for the two of them to sit without being seen. He lowered himself to the ground, leaning against the cold metal wall. Sarah sank down beside him, drawing her thin legs close to her chest. Her bare feet were dirty and scraped from the rooftop run, but she didn't complain. For a few minutes, they said nothing. The muffled hum of the docks filled the silence, ships lifting off somewhere far away. Heavy machinery grinding, distant shouts. Finally, Daniel spoke. "We can't stay long. We move when the next cargo ship leaves. The noise will cover us." Sarah nodded slowly, though her eyes didn't leave the ground. Daniel studied her face. In the harsh light from a flickering dock lamp, the bruises on her cheek stood out like shadows. Her hair was tangled, clinging to her skin. "You've been running for a while," he said. It wasn't a question. She hesitated, her lips pressing together, and for a moment Daniel thought she wouldn't answer. But then she spoke soft, almost like she was afraid the words themselves might hurt her. "They took me when I was small. My home, green fields, blue rivers. It is gone now." She paused, as if the image was hard to hold. Raiders came. Many ships. They burned the houses. My father fought. My mother hid me. But they found us. Her voice trembled, but she didn't cry. "My father, he died. My mother too. They sold me to the mines. I worked, digging. Always digging. No light. No sky. Only the rock." Daniel listened in silence. "I tried to run. Once they caught me. They beat me. Said I was property. Said I was not worth food if I would not work." She glanced up at him then, her silver eyes sharp with something between shame and anger. "So I ran again. This time made it to the market. But they found me there. Put me in the cage." Her voice dropped lower. "No one looked at me. No one until you." Daniel's jaw tightened. He had seen what slavery did to people. It broke them, piece by piece, until they either obeyed or they stopped being themselves. The fact that she had tried to run twice told him more about her than anything else. "You fought," he said quietly. "That matters." She gave a faint, bitter smile. "Fighting did not save me." "It did today," Daniel replied. "You're still here. That's what matters." Sarah didn't answer, but she shifted slightly, leaning her shoulder against his arm. It was a small movement, but Daniel noticed it. Trust given slowly, piece by piece. Outside their hiding spot, the sound of footsteps made them both freeze. A shadow moved across the narrow opening between the containers. Daniel's hand went to the knife on his belt. Two voices murmured in the alien tongue, just on the other side of the metal. One of them sounded familiar. The first market guard. The one Daniel had thrown off the platform. Daniel held his breath, ready to move if they looked inside. The footsteps stopped. One of the guards said something sharp. his voice full of frustration. Then the steps started again, fading away into the noise of the docks. Daniel didn't relax until the sound was gone. "We need to go," he whispered. Now Sierra straightened, her thin frame tense but ready. "We run." "Okay, not yet," Daniel said. "We move with the crowd. Keep your head down. Stay close." They slipped out from behind the containers and blended into a group of dock workers carrying crates. The smell of engine fuel grew stronger as they moved closer to the loading bays. Ships loomed above them, their hulls glowing in the artificial light. As they walked, Sierra spoke again, her voice low so only he could hear. "When you take me away, what will happen to me?" Daniel glanced at her. "That's up to you. You can go anywhere you want. No chains, no cages." She seemed to think about that for a moment, then said, "I want to see the green fields again, like my home. But I don't know if they exist now." Daniel didn't lie. "Maybe they don't, but there are other places, and you'll be free to find them." Sierra nodded slowly, and for the first time since he had met her, her lips curved into the smallest hint of a smile. It lasted only a second, because ahead, near the security checkpoint, Daniel spotted them. 2 guards, waiting. They weren't looking at the workers, they were scanning faces, searching. Daniel's hand brushed Sierra's shoulder. "Turn left, now." They slipped out of the main flow of people and into a narrow maintenance corridor. The air here was warmer, filled with the hum of power conduits. Sierra glanced up at him. "They saw us, maybe," Daniel said. "Either way, we can't take the front gate. We'll have to get to the docks from underneath." "Underneath?" She echoed. Daniel gave her a faint grin. "Every port has tunnels. Not many people know them. Lucky for us. I'm not most people." They moved deeper into the shadows, toward a hidden way out, and Daniel knew the real test was still coming. The maintenance corridor was narrow, dark, and hot. Pipes ran along the walls, humming with the flow of fuel and power. Dim lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the metal floor. The air smelled of oil and something faintly burnt. Daniel moved quickly, one hand on Sierra's shoulder to guide her, the other resting near the knife at his belt. He had been in places like this before, tight spaces where you could hear an enemy coming long before you saw them. Sierra kept close, her bare feet almost silent against the metal. "Where does this go?" she whispered. "Under the docks," Daniel replied quietly. "There's an access hatch that comes up near my ship. If we get there first, we're gone before they know where we went." But before they could take another 10 steps, a deep metallic clang echoed behind them. Sierra flinched. What was that? Daniel didn't answer right away. He turned his head slightly, listening. His footsteps, heavy ones, pounded against the corridor floor, getting closer. "They found us," Daniel said flatly. He scanned the narrow space ahead. The corridor bent sharply to the right, just before a side chamber with stacks of old cargo crates. That was their only chance. "Go," he told Sierra. "Hide behind the crates and don't come out until I say." Her silver eyes widened. "You'll fight them?" "Yes." She hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded and ran ahead. Daniel stayed behind, turning toward the sound of the approaching steps. The first guard appeared, ducking under the low ceiling. It was the same one Daniel had disarmed in the market, now carrying a heavy shock baton that buzzed with blue energy. "You should have left her," the guard growled. She's nothing." Daniel's voice was calm, but his stance shifted. "Wait. Balanced, she's not nothing, and you're not taking her." The guard roared and charged. Daniel sidestepped, grabbing the guard's arm and slamming him into the wall. The baton clattered to the floor, and Daniel's fist drove into the guard's stomach, knocking the wind out of him. But another figure appeared, taller, broader, the second guard from the platform. His armor plates were dented from their earlier fight, but he still looked dangerous. In his hands was a blaster rifle already aimed. Daniel dropped low just as the rifle fired. The blast hit the wall, sending sparks showering into the air. Daniel rolled forward, grabbing the fallen baton, and swung it upward into the guard's arm. The blaster flew from his grip, sliding across the floor. The first guard recovered and lunged from behind. Daniel spun, jabbing the baton into his side. The electric charge made the guard convulse before dropping to the ground. The bigger guard roared and charged barehanded. His punch slammed into Daniel's ribs, sending pain shooting through his side. Daniel gritted his teeth, stepped into the attack, and drove his elbow into the guard's jaw. They grappled, their boots scraping against the metal floor, until Daniel hooked a foot behind the guard's leg and threw him down. The guard hit the floor hard, his head cracking against the metal. For a moment, the corridor was silent except for Daniel's breathing. Then he heard more voices, more footsteps. He looked toward the bend in the corridor. 3 more guards were running toward them. Weapons drawn, Daniel didn't hesitate. "Sira, now." She darted out from behind the crates, her eyes wide but determined. Daniel grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the far end of the corridor. The hatch was there, a round metal door in the floor with a manual lock. Daniel knelt, twisting the handle hard. It creaked, then popped open, revealing a ladder that disappeared into darkness. "In," he said. Sira climbed down first, the sounds of shouting and boots getting louder behind them. Daniel followed, pulling the hatch shut above his head just as the first blaster bolts hissed through the air. The tunnel below was even narrower, just enough space to crouch and move quickly. The air was damp and cold, smelling of fuel and seawater. They moved fast, the metal beneath their hands and knees slick in places. Above, the muffled thud of boots followed them along the floor. Finally, a faint square of light appeared ahead. Daniel reached it, pushing open a small grate. Beyond was the shadow of the docks, the massive landing legs of his ship towering above them. They climbed out quickly. Daniel pulled the grate back into place, then motioned for Sarah to follow him toward the ship's side ramp. But just as they reached it, a voice shouted behind them. The big guard from earlier, bruised, bleeding, but still on his feet, stepped out from behind a stack of fuel barrels. He was holding the blaster rifle again, aimed directly at Daniel. "You don't leave," the guard growled. Daniel didn't break stride. His voice was like steel. "Yes, I do." The guard's finger tightened on the trigger, and then a sharp clang rang out. Sira had picked up a loose metal wrench from the ground and thrown it with all her strength. It struck the guard in the head, knocking him sideways. The shot went wide, hitting the dock floor in a burst of sparks. Daniel closed the distance in 2 steps, knocking the rifle away and slamming the guard into the barrels. The metal groaned, and the guard collapsed, unconscious. Daniel turned to Sira, a hint of a grin on his face. "Good throw." She blinked, still catching her breath. "You taught me," she said simply. Daniel opened the ship's ramp. "Let's get out of here, before his friends show up." They ran inside. The ramp closed. The engines roared to life as the ship lifted off. The lights of Kara 7 faded below them, but Daniel knew it wasn't over yet. Not until they were far beyond this planet's reach. The ship broke through the thick clouds of Kara 7, leaving the dusty planet far behind. Inside the cockpit, the hum of the engines filled the silence. Again. Daniel sat in the pilot's chair, his hands steady on the controls. The stars stretched out before them, bright and endless. Sira sat in the co-pilot's seat, her small frame dwarfed by it. She stared out at the stars like she had never seen them before, and maybe she hadn't. Her silver eyes reflected the starlight, wide with wonder and disbelief. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the low vibration of the ship and the faint beeping from the navigation panel. Finally, Sierra asked, They can't follow us now. Daniel glanced at the radar screen. It was clear. Not unless they have a faster ship, and they don't. Sierra let out a slow breath, leaning back in the chair. So, I'm free. Daniel looked at her. Yes, you're free. She sat in silence for a moment, as if tasting the word for the first time. Free, she whispered to herself, like she didn't quite believe it. Daniel adjusted the ship's course toward open space. Where do you want to go? She hesitated. I don't know. Only remember my home before the raiders came. Green fields, blue water, soft wind. But I don't even know if that place exists anymore. Daniel nodded slowly. Even if it doesn't, there are other places like it. Somewhere safe. Somewhere you can start again. Her gaze stayed fixed on the stars. Start again. She paused, then turned toward him. Will you be there? The question caught him for a moment. He could leave her anywhere she wanted, drop her off on a safe colony, and go on his way. But as he looked at her, this girl who had survived chains, beatings, and the cold emptiness of a cage, he knew the truth. Yeah, Daniel said. I'll be there. Sierra's lips curved into a small, fragile smile. Then, I don't care where we go. Daniel almost smiled back, but the thought of the planet they had just left and the people still trapped there weighed on him. There's something you should know, he said. Her head tilted. What, Karasavan wasn't the only place like that? There are others. Whole worlds where people are treated the way they treated you. I can't save them all. But maybe we can save a few. Sierra's eyes widened slightly. You mean, go back? Help others? Daniel shrugged one shoulder. You fought today. Threw a wrench at a guard twice your size. That means you're not just someone who survived, you're someone who can fight back. She looked down at her hands, small and thin, but clenched now with quiet strength. If I help, will it be dangerous? Yes, Daniel said, without hesitation. She nodded once. Then I'll do it. The cockpit went quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of silence as before. This time, it was filled with something. Heavier a promise neither of them had spoken fully. But both understood. Daniel leaned back in the pilot's chair, the hum of the engine steady beneath them. First things first, you need food. Real food. Not the kind they gave you in the mines. Sierra's eyes lit up a little. And water that doesn't taste like metal. Daniel smirked. Yeah, and maybe clothes that aren't falling apart. She laughed softly, the first real laugh he had heard from her, and for a moment, the darkness of the past seemed far away. The stars outside shifted as the ship jumped to faster-than-light travel. The streaks of light blurred into a river of white and blue, carrying them far from Karasavan. Sierra pressed her hand against the window, her voice quiet but steady. I thought I'd die there. I thought no one would ever see me again. She looked at him. But you came. Daniel met her gaze. You're not going back there. Ever. She held his eyes for a moment, then nodded. Then I'll hold on to that. No matter what comes next. He didn't say it out loud, but in his mind, he made a promise, not just to keep her safe, but to make sure she never felt like she was nothing again, in the silence that followed. Sierra's head began to tilt slightly. The tension in her shoulders eased. Moments later, she had fallen asleep in the co-pilot's chair, her breathing slow and even. Daniel adjusted the ship's course toward the nearest safe system, his eyes scanning the starlit void ahead. He knew there would be other fights, other cages to break, other people to pull out of the dark. But for now, he let her sleep, and for the first time in a long while, Daniel felt something close to peace, because some promises were worth keeping, no matter how far you had to go to keep them.